Introduction to the Cultivation Record of the Wild Mountain Witch. With the joint efforts of various immortal sects, she killed the witch clan and became the last survivor. The Immortal Sect chased after her and wanted to eradicate her, but the treasure was taken and the altar was shattered, forcing her to flee to the abandoned land of the gods. Returning, she will surely break through the enemy's immortal gate and retrieve the spirit treasure of the witch race. The witch reappears, and this time, it will be reshuffled. No CP, divination. 1. Execute and kill. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hualon continent, there's still one remaining sin to escape. Chase after her. She's running north. A man with a long sword in his hand and a majestic aura loudly ordered the crowd behind him. Distance at this moment, the black-robed woman, covering her wound and constantly running, her heart was beating exceptionally fast and her fair face was covered in bloodstains. She gritted her teeth and ran with all her might. Blood stains had already appeared on her ankles, her shoes had fallen off during the escape, and the surrounding weeds had worn down her soles. She seemed to feel no pain and was still running away quickly, her pale lips trembling constantly. Stop. There she is. The remnants of the witch race are there. A hurried and excited voice came from behind, and Chang Miao's spine stiffened and tightened instantly. Now her spiritual pulse is unstable, and if she forcefully targets these people, she may not be able to survive. Now she cannot use her spiritual power, like a prisoner who is being slaughtered at will. Qinghua Zhenren frowned and looked at the black figure below, then his eyebrows stretched out. Finally, he found the remaining sin. He looked at the other members of the Immortal Sect slowly approaching from behind and shouted loudly again, "Come over. Don't let her escape again." Ha ha ha. Chang Miao didn't run far, and many people had already descended around her, surrounded by fairies who were usually dignified. Now, with a fierce expression on their faces, they were killing her as a young generation, hoping to bring her to ashes. Chang Miao knew that he might have more or less misfortune today, but when he thought about the jade qiong in his body, it was the treasure of the witch race and could never fall into the hands of these people. She turned her head around, trying to find a way out, but unfortunately, the people around her surrounded her tightly and didn't give her a chance to breathe. The leader of the Qinghua Immortal aimed his sword at Chang Miao and shouted, "You, this remaining evil, where are you going? Today, your witch tribe will surely be destroyed." The cultivators around saw the Qinghua Immortal with the Hualon Immortal Sect leading the way, and the guilt in their hearts disappeared without a trace. For a moment, everyone aimed their swords at Chang Miao, who had fallen to the ground covered in blood. Just as everyone was preparing to shoot 10,000 arrows, a light and agile voice came. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be merciful. The peach rain is coming too late." The woman was dressed in a water-red fairy skirt, with a flying fairy hair bun. Her fair face had delicate and gentle facial features. She raised her lips and gently looked at the people around her, and her figure fell beside Chang Miao, who was in a state of embarrassment. Compared to the other person, she looked as holy as a goddess. Qinghua Zhenren saw that the person he came from was Jiang Taoyu, the daughter of his sect leader. His originally angry expression instantly became friendly, and he looked at Jiang Taoyu gently. "Taoyu, nephew, what are you doing here? These dirty people are bound to be executed by us. Taoyu, nephew, do you want us to save her life?" Upon hearing the words of the real person from Tsinghua University, Jiang Taoyu suddenly covered her face and smiled. She then turned around and fiercely pinched Chang Miao's chin, gazing at his face covered in blood. She smiled even happier, with a gentle smile on her eyebrows and eyes. However, Chang Miao saw a constant stream of joy in her pupils. She didn't seem to have had any conflict with this fairy in her memory. Her chin was tightly pinched by the woman in front of her, and her crimson nails were embedded in her flesh. The pain spread throughout her face, and Chang Miao shook it off hard, only to find that the woman didn't intend to let herself break free smoothly. She lowered her head with a smile on her face and said, "You fairies are joking. How could Peach Rain ask a remaining sin to save her a lowly life? I just want to tell you all that she has hidden the secret treasures of the witch clan on her body. Upon hearing Jiang Taoyu's words, many immortals gathered around them, their eyes flashing with saliva and excitement. Their gaze instantly gathered on Chang Miao, all eager to move, because everyone understood what this treasure of the witch race was. It's just that person named Yu Qiong. At this moment, Chang Miao had no idea that what she was desperately trying to protect had been discovered. She suddenly looked up at Jiang Taoyu and said, "Who are you? How do you know that Yu Qiong is on me?" Jiang Taoyu lowered her head to play with her fingers and looked uninteresting at Chang Miao, who had already been pushed to the ground by her. "Ha! Who am I? You don't need to know, you just need to know. From now on, there will be no more of you in this world of cultivating immortals." As soon as the words fell, Jiang Taoyu changed his gentle expression and swung his long sword directly, piercing Chang Miao's chest and taking the precious treasure. Yu Qiong. The people around took a deep breath, and the newcomers were all powerful beings of the Immortal Sect. Everyone coveted this precious treasure of the witch tribe. In front of them, Jiang Taoyu was nothing but a junior. Jiang Taoyu, on the other hand, is the first major character, the daughter of the head of the Hualan Immortal Sect. With this level of identity alone, no one dares to easily snatch anything from her hands, and can only watch helplessly as it falls into her hands. Helplessly, everyone retreated and begged for a second chance, only to see if they could extract other favorable things from this remaining evil. Good, good. She truly deserves to be the daughter of our Hualan Immortal Sect leader. Peach Rain little nephew is indeed more outstanding than Blue, and this precious treasure will definitely make the leader very happy. It seems that in the near future, Peach Rain little nephew will also be promoted greatly. The Qinghua immortal beside him warmly praised, although he also wanted the Jade Qiong, Jiang Taoyu's identity was placed there, and he dared not act recklessly, he could only watch eagerly. Yu Qiong has been buried in her body for many years, and has long been integrated with Chang Miao, living together. It has been attached to her heart for a long time, but now it has been gouged out. The scene was once bloody and cruel, but the people around her are all looking with excitement and curiosity. Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net completely did not expect them to be ruthlessly attacking a younger generation. The blood and flesh blurred chest was empty, and the pain of the torn heart made Chang Miao couldn't help but scream fiercely. "I hate you all." Ah! Jiang Taoyu excitedly and decisively plucked Chang Miao's Jade Qiong out of her heart with a sword. Chang Miao's black clothes had been dyed even grayer. She knelt down on the ground, her originally fair face now covered in blood, as if a soulless body. Yu Qiong was wrapped in bright red blood and fell into Jiang Taoyu's palm. She looked at Yu Qiong with some disdain. "It's really dirty. But because it's a treasure, I reluctantly accepted it." Chang Miao's eyes were filled with tears of hatred, and the red blood wrapped around her white eyes. She tried hard to raise her hand and support her shaky body on the ground. Looking at the people around her, she tried her best to remember these disgusting and greedy faces. She opened her mouth and shouted with all her remaining strength, "You are in vain as cultivators of the Immortal Avenue. Even though your heart is like a snake or scorpion, you have the delusion of soaring to become a god. You slaughtered my people, gouged out my Jade Qiong. You are not worthy of immortality. Die for me." Her eyes were red, and she felt even more uncomfortable as she thought of her own people's tormented death. Her voice was hoarse and heartbroken, as if she had gone crazy. The people around her looked at Chang Miao's appearance and instantly understood her intentions. Jiang Taoyu raised her eyebrows and sneered at Chang Miao's expression. "Huh? Do you want to self-destruct? You're beyond your means." Bang! It seemed as if he had exhausted his lifelong spiritual power, and Chang Miao shattered all of his shrine. The shrine scattered around with strong spiritual energy, forming a huge wave of spiritual energy. The nearby sect immortals did not react, and their bodies were instantly cut by fragments of the shrine. They quickly transported a shield to resist the spirit, layer after layer stacked in front of them. 2. Abandoned Land of God. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Breaking down all of his shrines was a feeling that even his soul was about to be torn apart. Chang Miao's move had already declared his determination to pull everyone together to death, but he didn't expect to end up doing useless work. Watching the people from various immortal sects around them, they opened up their strongest resistance to spiritual energy and protected their heart meridians. They were only cut open by the shattered fragments of the altar and had a few skin wounds. But it couldn't hurt deep. On the contrary, it was herself who not only lost the precious treasure of the witch clan, Yuqiong, but now even the shrine has been shattered, her spiritual power has been exhausted, and her whole body is weak. In front of Jiang Taoyu, 2 people blocked the fragments of the altar for her. She was unharmed and quickly put away her jade qiong in her hand. She looked disdainfully at Chang Miao, who had already exhausted her spiritual energy, and raised her lips. Today, this woman must die. The remaining sins of the witch race must not be left behind, so as not to breathe heavily and make one unable to sleep at night. She turned her head and shouted to the surrounding immortals. Everyone around wants Chang Miao to die, and no one wants to leave any future troubles. Immediately rushing forward, all the killing moves were revealed, and Chang Miao was powerless to fight back. There was only a dead end waiting for her, and a sense of powerlessness instantly filled her body. Her eyes were red, and she looked up at the sky in a daze, her pupils filled with endless sorrow. The skies suddenly became particularly dark, with light raindrops falling on her body, and the surrounding magical tools rushing towards her body. 10,000 swords pierced through the heart. Chang Miao closed his eyes, even in pain, he didn't let out a sound. His lips clenched tightly, and he threw himself heavily onto the ground, his body covered in blood-stained holes. Jiang Taoyu raised her eyebrows and looked at the dead Chang Miao before finally letting go. She turned her head and waved her sleeves, and the people around her also left one by one. The sky was dim and terrifying, with faint flashes drifting in the air. Chang Miao lay on the muddy ground in his black blood clothes, feeling terrifying silence. At this moment, the changes in the sky also made many people in the Immortal Sect wary. On the vast Hualan continent, there were many disciples of Immortal Sect standing below, and even the scattered cultivators who never used to watch the excitement flew into mid-air to watch this strange transformation. This celestial phenomenon is changing. If I remember correctly, the abandoned land is about to be opened. Open every 100 years. This is a sign of the opening of the abandoned land of God. Hurry up and stay away, so as not to be sucked in and fall into it and never get out again. The mutation in the sky is eye-catching, and a black vortex seems to be slowly expanding. The person who understands that the door of abandonment has been opened has already moved away from the center of the vortex. Somewhere on the mountain peak, Chang Miao lay lifeless on the ground, her black robe unable to block her blood. The bloodstains fell on the ground, leaving her in a state of embarrassment, with a strong smell of blood emanating from her surroundings. The center of the vortex came over her, and a huge spiritual energy swirled endlessly. Below, Chang Miao only had a faint breath left, forcefully opening his eyelids. Looking at the vortex in the sky, covered in blood, she grinned and said that witches cannot predict by themselves, but she happened to have predicted for herself, which was a great omen. Now it has all come true. If you want to change your destiny against the heavens, you can only sacrifice all of your body. In exchange for new students. They witches avoid this method of sacrificing their own bodies, as it is an ancient forbidden technique. The only condition for using the witch tribe's sacrificial forbidden spell is to encounter a great evil formation before the forbidden spell can be activated. Today, she thought she really fell here. But unexpectedly, the vortex formation that touched the abandoned land of the gods opened up. Chang Miao suddenly felt an inexplicable spiritual energy enter his body, and his body became very agile, as if he could float at any time. She couldn't help but lie on the ground in a frenzy and burst out laughing. Heaven won't let me fall. You still have some conscience, heavenly Tao. If I had a day to live, Chang Miao would have killed all these righteous immortal people. Chang Miao's voice was hoarse but unusually firm. The vortex in the abandoned land was so large that the entire sky became dim, and Chang Miao felt his shattered body constantly being pulled inside by a powerful force. With my body, I am reborn. Chang Miao's eyes lit up as she stared at the vortex that constantly pulled her in front of her. Her body was pulled into mid-air, and the rune on her forehead was scorching hot. She silently recited the spell. The black talismans were arranged one by one, slowly wrapping around the periphery of her body, as if small blood holes had been carved out around her. The blood turned into a thin layer of mist and slowly surged into the vortex. Chang Miao felt that his body at this moment was even more painful than when Yuqiong was gouged out, but the spell couldn't stop. Still need to quickly wrap the rune all over your body. Layer after layer of rune shackles, until blood could no longer gush out, she finally smiled with relief. Surprisingly succeeded. She was instantly sucked into the abandoned land, and her whole body seemed like an incredibly light rag, entering the vortex and quickly disappearing. Abandoned land of God. The terrifying wilderness around was filled with a sense of stillness, and the decaying skeleton of spirit beasts was partially exposed on the surface of the loess. The people coming and going around were all ragged and pale, like walking corpses. Most of them are expressionless, seemingly very familiar with the surrounding environment, so familiar that nothing can arouse their emotions. There are still some scattered and slow-moving spirit beasts, but the spirit beasts in the abandoned land are covered with a cloud of turbid energy, and some even have faint signs of being possessed. In the abandoned land of the gods, many are exiled or abandoned cultivators, and demonic cultivators are not uncommon. Survival here is much more difficult than that of external cultivators. Not only should we be wary of spirit beasts who want to eat at any time, but we also need to guard against the plunder of many abandoned cultivators around us. Just as everyone was still wandering aimlessly, Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net suddenly opened a huge vortex in the sky, and the cultivators below all looked up. TSK. Who the hell is this? It seems that our abandoned land is about to welcome new people again. How many years have passed, but it has made me fresh. Ha ha ha. No one is allowed to compete with me. I will train this newcomer. The people around were eyeing the constantly falling bodies in the sky, only to see a dark mass, rapidly falling. The circle originally surrounded by the crowd saw the people falling in the sky, and immediately moved back, leaving a space in the middle. Swelling, Chang Miao was like a stone with only a center of gravity, slamming onto the ground. Suddenly, dust and smoke rose up, and people around him raised their hands and fanned the dust that had already spread to them, feeling somewhat disgusted. Wow! Is this doll's altar all broken? TSK. Poor. What a pity. The dust and smoke dissipated, and the people around gathered around Chang Miao in an instant. I had planned to teach the newcomer a good lesson, but this girl looked really miserable. TSK. I'm not in the mood to bully this girl, you old guys can do it on your own. I'm leaving, said the old man in a tattered white shirt with a disheveled hair. The people next to them all stretched their necks and glanced at Chang Miao lying in a deep pit, all showing uninteresting expressions and slowly walking away one by one. A useless person, even my ghost wife disdains to play with it. A particularly ugly old woman quickly left with a cane, and the surroundings instantly returned to silence. The spiritual energy of the vortex in the abandoned land gradually dissipated, and the door of the abandoned land had closed. Black rain and mist began to fall on the earth, dripping on Chang Miao's face. 3. Abandoned Land of God, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lying in the deep pit, Chang Miao felt as if she had been asleep for a long time, dreaming of being born into the witch tribe in the past. That year, the clan leader held her and stood on the ladder, telling the people below that she was the only little witch they had begged for hundreds of years to be born. Chang Miao didn't understand why she was called a little witch by her tribe, but she was indeed born with much stronger perception than her tribe. She had no father or mother, only her tribe, and each tribe member was her relative. The people of the Ku clan were all driven away and killed by those who claimed to be the main members of the Immortal Sect. The Wu mansion has never opened a clan gate for 100 years, but once it appeared in front of people, it suffered this calamity. Perhaps the black rain was too cold, pattering against her pale face. She couldn't help but frown and forcefully open her thick eyelids. Everything seemed like a big dream. The people of the tribe were slaughtered, the treasures of the witch tribe were looted, one by one, vividly remembered. Chang Miao only felt that his head was muddy and powerful, and his eyes were blurred, unable to see the surrounding scenery clearly. When she got up and sat up, she realized that she was in a deep pit. When she looked up, she saw a loose mud wall several sections higher than herself. She propped up her body with force, panting cautiously like a thread. Her memories were somewhat confused, and she only remembered that in the end, she had to sacrifice her body using the forbidden magic of the witch tribe in order to survive. Her current body can be said to be a walking corpse. She looked down at her tattered body, not only did not show a sad expression, but instead burst out laughing. She looked up and felt the black rain falling from the sky, laughing wildly. Ha ha ha. I'm not dead. It seems that even the heavenly Tao wants me to stay alive, heavenly Tao. I thank you. She tilted her head and enjoyed the black rain dripping on her face to the fullest. At this moment, strange sounds echoed around the deep pit, and Chang Miao instantly stopped his laughter. He looked up vigilantly at the edge of the pit above, surrounded by a group of strange-looking spiritual beasts. Damn it! Chang Miao looked at the spirit beasts standing on top, each eyeing her fiercely. How could she not see how these spirit beasts wanted to swallow her immediately? Now her body was like a rag, and when encountering these spirit beasts, she could only let them gnaw on her. However, looking at their appearance, she probably couldn't come down from this deep pit. She just needed to stay here. As long as those spirit beasts found out that they couldn't eat her, I'm sure I'll be able to leave wisely. Having figured this out, Chang Miao immediately sat cross-legged and quietly in the deep pit. The spiritual beast on top was already entrenched, waiting for this guy who had no spiritual energy to come up and immediately split the food. However, he never expected that this person was actually sitting inside. No matter how they shout, they won't come out. Isn't that to anger people? The spiritual beasts around also called for their companions to come and tightly surround the edge of this deep pit. You should know that they couldn't have eaten such fresh flesh before. The cultivators who were expelled from the abandoned land of the gods all had some serious illnesses, one by one fierce. Once they dared to approach, they were immediately killed. Finally, they encountered a seemingly weak and good-looking guy. How could they not be excited? I have to eat this guy's meat today. These spirit beasts began to show unprecedented patience, sitting directly on the edge of the deep pit until they had to wait for Chang Miao to come out. At this moment, Chang Miao, who was sitting in the pit, had her legs crossed and her hands were constantly condensing, wanting to explore the spiritual energy in her body. A layer of cold sweat had already covered her behind, and she tried her best to search the spiritual pool. Finally, she found a trace of her own spiritual energy in a corner. She breathed a sigh of relief in an instant. As long as there is still a trace of spiritual energy, she can start over again. She is not afraid of the need to practice again. She is afraid that after her altar is shattered, she will not be able to cultivate her spirit again and will only become a useless person. Watching those cultivators who have slaughtered her own clan succeed in front of her, it must be the greatest irony for her. At the moment she self-destructed her spiritual platform, although she had already thought of dying with those people, looking at the fragments of the platform, she did not leave any traces on those people's bodies, and the fluctuation of spiritual energy did not affect others. It was only then that she realized she was still too weak. When she was first born in the great wilderness witch mansion, she had been favored by the clan members and clan leaders for many years. The chieftain had her own child, but she treated her like her own child. She once asked the chieftain who her parents were, and the chieftain said that she was bestowed by a witch. At that time, she felt that her father was mysterious, but in the chaos, she could always hear a hazy voice calling out to her. She watched as the starry spiritual energy slowly gathered in the corner, forming a small ball. She couldn't help but feel hopeful in her heart, leaving the green mountains without fear of burning firewood. Suddenly grateful that she had preserved a trace of her spiritual energy when she exploded on the altar, phew, a crisp whistle suddenly sounded, and Chang Miao was interrupted. He immediately looked up at the top and couldn't help but be stunned. The heads of this group of spirit beasts were stretched out at the edge, looking at her. Some even saliva flowed out. Chang Miao's face was slightly heavy, and it seemed that these spirit beasts must eat her today, otherwise they wouldn't want to leave. The whistle actually drew the group of spirit beasts directly to one side. Chang Miao was in the deep pit and couldn't understand what was happening on the top of the pit. The spirit beasts that were originally perched on top disappeared from her sight one after another, and she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a head protruded from the top of the deep pit, and he looked at Chang Miao, who was dressed in rags, and was somewhat surprised. "Oh, there's actually a girl here." He patted his smooth head and looked at Chang Miao below with joy, shouting, "Little girl, should I pull you up?" Chang Miao was startled by the loud shout. She lifted her head and looked up at the smooth head above. She furrowed her brows and thought to herself, "This person is bald, can he be a Buddha? What is this place? How could there be a Buddha?" In the midst of her confusion, Wu Zhen above looked at her face with a slight surprise. This girl didn't see her face and only thought she had a delicate and charming appearance. Why did she look up so much? Wu Zhen was not surprised by the ugliness of the other person's face, but rather curious about the strange rune mark on the girl's forehead. The rune was like a round wheel perched on her fair and dusty forehead, with eerie patterns resembling snake patterns and symbols. He felt strange just by looking at it, but as he watched her fall into this deep pit, he planned to show mercy once and directly threw down the iron rope in his hand. "Little girl, come up, I have no warning to throw you the iron rope." Watching the bald Buddha throw down a heavy and long iron rope, Chang Miao's heart twitched and he climbed up with force. His thin palm grabbed the iron rope with force, and as soon as his fingertips touched it, a chill struck. For no admonition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The piercing coldness hit her emaciated palm, and Chang Miao suddenly withdrew his palm, vigilantly looking at Wu Zhen above. "Oh hey. I'm sorry, little girl. I forgot to chill the iron rope, so I went to catch the spirit beast and infused it with cold energy." Wu Zhen touched his nose, feeling a bit embarrassed. With a pull of his palm, the iron rope was easily retracted by him. His other hand condensed spiritual energy and hit the heavy iron rope. After a while, the cold energy of the iron rope was completely dispelled, and he finally threw it down again. "Don't worry now, there's no cold air on the iron rope anymore. Miss, come up quickly." Wu Zhen looked at Chang Miao below with a cheerful smile on his face. He looked at the disheveled girl, who was really pitiful and tight. If he didn't come up again, the dark rain would come down heavily, and this deep pit would be filled. At that time, she could only be submerged by the black rain. Chang Miao once again extended her hand to explore the iron rope. This time, she firmly grasped the iron rope and was slowly pulled up by Wu Zhen. Chang Miao seemed to go from the deep pit to the flat ground, and in an instant, she felt that the air above had become much fresher. Although she was not disturbed by spiritual beasts in the deep pit, the smell emanating from the mud walls of the pit was really unpleasant. She turned her head to look at the Buddha who had pulled her up. His head was smooth and powerful, and he looked as young as herself, looking like a teenager. It was the Dan Feng eyes that looked a bit sinister, with fair skin and a tall figure. Chang Miao stood up and could only reach his shoulder. He had to look up to see his appearance clearly, which was a bit difficult. "What's going on?" Little girl, why are you staring at my face? Wu Zhen looked at the girl he had pulled up, staring at his own face all the time, but he wasn't angry. Because there was no repulsive scrutiny in the girl's eyes, as if it was just a simple glance at him, he didn't care. Upon hearing this, Chang Miao withdrew his gaze and thanked the person in front of him, "Thank you very much for the Buddha's help." When I heard the little girl calling me Buddha, Wu Zhen felt amused. When did I forget to call myself Buddha? Speaking of which, he walked bareheaded in this abandoned land, and no one thought he was a Buddha. After all, there was no handsome man like him who was willing to sacrifice his countless green threads and expose the smooth back of his head. However, upon hearing the name Buddha again, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Thank you, it's okay, little girl. I saved you just because you're interesting, but brother, I'm not a Buddha. You need to remember." His voice was clear and alluring, which made Chang Miao, who was beside him, unable to help but leave another impression on him. This person doesn't seem very serious. Upon hearing him say that she was not a Buddha, Chang Miao couldn't help but carefully examine him again and found that his demeanor, apart from his smooth head, had no trace of a Buddha. Instead, there was a hint of demonic aura leaking out, and she suddenly froze for a moment. But it was this momentary loss of consciousness. Even though she quickly restrained herself, Wu Zhen caught her. He curled his lips and leaned closer to the little girl's face, his warm breath pouncing on her ear. "What's wrong? I'm afraid, my brother is not a good person. I'm a bald demon, magic." Chang Miao turned his head to look at him. His seductive and wicked eyes were fixed on the little girl, but Chang Miao's expression remained calm and not like that of a normal person. She stared into his eyes for a moment of contemplation, then spoke confidently, "Indeed, you are not a Buddha, but you can also be considered a Buddha. You were a demon cultivator in the early years, and later became a Buddhist. Unfortunately, your demonic nature did not change, and you were expelled by the heavenly way into this place." Unexpectedly, as soon as Chang Miao finished speaking, a pair of strong hands immediately grabbed his neck, and his veins were clearly visible through his fair neck. She was forcefully lifted up by Wu Zhen, as if carrying a tattered shirt. Chang Miao suppressed the panic in his eyes, regained his composure, and looked at Wu Zhen, whose eyes were already red and uncertain with no sadness or joy. Wu Zhen never expected that this person would know his background. He gritted his teeth, his crimson eyes emitting a dangerous aura. He looked at the little girl in front of him and sternly questioned, "How did you know? What else do you know? Who the hell are you?" Looking at the man who was so angered by one of her words, Chang Miao sighed. At this moment, her breathing was a bit slow. She had just regained a trace of spiritual energy, but couldn't bear to use it to confront this person. She whispered, "I calculated it." She remained calm for a second, and Wu Zhen was stunned. Then, she looked at Chang Miao with some surprise, "Are you a wizard?" "Yes," Chang Miao returned. After a while, she felt like she was about to lose all her breath when her heels suddenly landed on the ground. She opened her eyes and looked at the man who had already regained his clarity, then breathed a sigh of relief. Who knew that just one sentence could anger him and almost ruin her own life again? Oh, the witch actually fell into this place too. It seems that the outside is not peaceful. Little girl, do you know where this place is? Wu Zhen relaxed completely. After learning that this little girl could not threaten him, he no longer had so much concern. Chang Miao glanced around and found that the surroundings were desolate, with occasional yellow sand floating in the air, which was uncomfortable. She closed her eyes slightly and wanted to do some divination, but found that she couldn't do it. She sighed and only used one divination. Now, divination is already her limit, and now she doesn't just want to do it casually. Thinking of this, she sighed helplessly and shook her head at Wu Zhen, saying, "I don't know." Her honesty made Wu Zhen laugh. He looked up and pointed his hand towards the distance, saying to Chang Miao, "Do you think this place is so desolate and devoid of spiritual energy? This place is a place abandoned by gods. It opens every 100 years. Abandoned land of God. Chang Miao's memories suddenly gathered. She remembered the moment she sacrificed and saw the gate of the abandoned land open. It was also a coincidence that the abandoned land opened every 100 years. She died on that day, and the gate of the abandoned land happened to open. She also successfully used the sacrificial prohibition technique to be reborn. Ha ha ha, are you scared, little girl? Once someone is expelled into this place, let alone for 100 years, they won't be able to leave for tens of thousands of years. Ha ha ha. Wu Zhen smiled and his eyes suddenly turned red. Chang Miao looked at him, who looked very sad, but wanted to burst out laughing, feeling a bit out of place. But upon careful consideration, she used the witchcraft's prohibition technique, but was not expelled by the heavenly way, so it was not considered expulsion. It must have been 100 years, and when the door opened, she could still go out again. Chang Miao calmed down a lot and looked at Wu Zhen calmly. I wasn't expelled, I can still go out, she said, ha ha ha. Ha ha. Wu Zhen originally laughed quite loudly, but after listening to the little girl's words, he was shocked and almost lost. He stared at her in surprise. What are you talking about? Are you lying, right? Wu Zhen gritted his teeth and lifted his hands to shake the thin and weak shoulders of the girl. 5. Siege. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In front of him, Wu Zhen looked incredulous. Chang Miao was shaken by him, feeling his bones about to break apart, and couldn't help but shout loudly. Don't shake me. What I'm saying is true. The girl's voice was hoarse, but she could still hear a hint of ethereal energy. Wu Zhen stopped and stared at her angrily. Oh. Since it's not of the same kind, it's boring. Abandoning this sentence, Wu Zhen walked away expressionlessly. After a while, Chang Miao could no longer see his figure. This person's temperament was unpredictable. Although she saved herself, she was also worried that his emotions might be wrong and she would be pinched to death the next second. She glanced at the desolate surroundings, and the cold air struck. She was dressed in a tattered black robe. Like a pitiful creature, she stumbled and planned to leave this place first. She walked with her own body all the way, and the sacrificial technique was a bit bad. Although her body had been reshaped, her early control of her body was like controlling someone else's body, which was uncomfortable everywhere. Chang Miao felt a sense of powerlessness, and soon she finally saw the realm that could still be said to have smoke and fire. Thinking about it, as long as it's not deserted and uninhabited, any wild beast that emerges there can tear her apart from her current weakness. Without the altar, she can't cultivate in the normal way of a cultivator. Fortunately, she is a witch and can forge new undead spirits by practicing runes. Surrounded by people with pale expressions and various eerie expressions, when passing by Chang Miao, she couldn't help but raise her eyes to look at her. Chang Miao felt like she was naked, and these people's eyes were too exposed, making her feel at a loss. She walked quickly towards a huge stone gate, and above it, she could clearly see a few words carved on it. Qingshi Street. Her eyes lit up a bit, but she didn't expect there to be another cave in this abandoned land. She had thought that every part of this abandoned land was so lifeless and uninhabited, but she didn't expect there to be streets and various extraordinary eaves and houses, which was truly surprising. She stepped on blocks of bluestone floors with her feet, dressed in rags and somewhat out of place with the bustling streets inside. The people walking inside scanned her with a contemptuous expression as Chang Miao entered. Some abandoned immortals hold their heads high. Passing by her, those eyes looked contemptuous, curious, strange. It made Chang Miao feel a bit tired. Suddenly, a strong wind passed by her side, and the corner of her clothes also floated up. The wind was obviously very strong, and she was thrown to the ground directly. Her whole body let out a muffled groan, and she felt pain in her bones. The wind stopped, and a person stood in front of her, curiously bending down to look at her. Chang Miao smelled the strange smell on his body. Frowning tightly, this smell is not an ordinary odor, but rather the smell of decaying bones. She lifted her eyelids slightly and saw the enlarged face in front of her. She couldn't help but scream, "Ah!" That face seemed to have also been frightened, wrinkled and looking at the girl on the ground with dissatisfaction. What's the point of shouting? This delicate and tender person, I'm just walking normally, you can't even stand steady. You're a useless person. The people around them, upon hearing the old man's words, also turned their gaze to Chang Miao, who was slowly climbing up on the ground, and burst into laughter for a moment. The old man saw Chang Miao's face lift and suddenly saw a rune willed the size of the palm of his hand hovering between her forehead. His face changed instantly and he was overjoyed. His face twitched with pleasure as he said, "Are you from the witch clan?" Chang Miao, who had just stood firm, had a puzzled expression on her face. How could this person know that she was from the witch clan? Before she could see this person carefully, she only felt a lightness on her body, floating rapidly, just like the wind when she was knocked down by that gust of wind just now. However, as she was now, she was being pulled up and floated by this old man, really like a piece of rag pulling everywhere. She detested this feeling and wanted to break free from the palm that was gripping her back collar, but she couldn't break free no matter how hard she tried. Chang Miao simply gave up. Good guy. The old man picked her up like a little chick and didn't know where he was going to catch her. Chang Miao said he was very panicked now, not to mention that the old man even knew he was a member of the witch tribe and didn't know what this excitement was about. She only felt that all the scenery around her had turned into nothingness. The originally noisy environment suddenly underwent a earth-shattering change, and it took her a long time to recover. She only felt a dizzy sensation in her head, and after a long time, her gaze became clear. She glanced at the scene in front of her, and her eyes turned black, almost wanting to curse the old man to death. She finally managed to get from the barren place to the relatively bustling Qingshe Street, and now she has brought back this barren place where the weeds don't grow a single root. She only feels the pain in her forehead, and if it weren't for her current lack of ability, she would have wished to bring a rune curse to this old man. What are you looking at? What are you looking at? I ask you, do all of you witches know the art of divination, and do you have any ability to communicate with gods? The old man just touched the ground and eagerly grabbed Chang Miao to ask. Rather than asking, Chang Miao felt more forced to ask because the old man's face was strange and could not be considered a good expression. He scrutinized his own appearance with sharp scrutiny. Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net made Chang Miao very uncomfortable. She took a few steps back, and the old man gritted his teeth and forcefully pulled her over. What's the old man asking you? You weak witch, all you need to do is tell me if you can. The old man shouted loudly at Chang Miao, and his huge mouth opened up like a giant beast in front of him. The strange smell once again invaded her nose, and she almost couldn't bear to vomit. This time, she smelled the scent firmly and was even more certain that the strange smell on the old man's body was the smell of rotting corpses. A cultivator would never have such a smell, unless he was a demon cultivator. Those who practice by eating corpses are ruthless and disregard everything, without resorting to any means to achieve their goals. Chang Miao sighed inwardly that he was unlucky enough to be caught by a ghost cultivator. Now she couldn't run even if she wanted to, so she could only honestly answer, I can, but I can't predict now. She spread out her hand and waved a few times in front of the old man, trying to make him believe. Unexpectedly, the old man's entire face changed when he heard that he was angry. He threw Chang Miaoli onto the ground and shouted, You're lying. You witches all know how to do divination, why can't you do it? Do you think you're lying to me? Watching this person's uncontrollable anger, Chang Miao sneered and propped up her body, pointing to her heart. My altar is completely shattered, and now I am a useless person. What do you want me to do divination for? I can no longer calculate my abilities, why bother arguing with me? She even pretended to show off her weakness in the altar, so that this person would give up his own ideas. However, the old man didn't buy her account and shouted loudly. Since he's a waste. Then let's die. He suddenly opened his mouth wide, and a black aura emerged from it. Chang Miao never expected this old man to be so stubborn. 6. Crisis. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. She didn't expect that a single sentence could make this old hare angry. The strange smell on Gue Xiu's body was not to be underestimated, and all the corrosive aura on his body would erode his skin even if it touched a little. Chang Miao quickly covered his mouth and nose, and walked back in a panic. A black mist emerged from the old man's mouth, becoming increasingly thick. The whole black mist instantly wrapped Chang Miao, who was standing in the center, tightly. She gritted her teeth and looked at the black air surrounding her, which was circling one after another. Even though she covered her mouth and nose at this moment, some of it still penetrated her nasal cavity, and she couldn't even stop the rotten smell. Ha ha ha. Little girl, do you think you can cover your mouth and nose to avoid my black energy? It's really naive. I've been practicing ghost cultivation for many years, and I've eaten so many decaying corpses. This black energy is a kind of yin and decay energy that you can resist. The old man laughed up and looked at the girl surrounded by the black energy with disdain in his eyes. The way of ghost cultivation harms others and oneself, and ultimately corrodes your own body. Why bother? Despite the pain in his body, Chang Miao could only use his limited spiritual energy to drive away this annoying black energy. No matter how she drives it away, the black energy increases instead of decreasing. It's really addictive and even more domineering. The black energy doesn't dissipate, and it dissolves into several black air currents that are about to rush into her 7 orifices, wanting to enter her body. As Chang Miao was about to run out of spiritual energy and couldn't stop these black energies, an iron rope was thrown from above and quickly wrapped around her waist and abdomen, pulling her into mid-air. The cold air of the iron rope penetrated her abdomen in waves, causing Chang Miao to shiver from the cold. She felt waves rising again and again, which was really unlucky. She tugged hard at the iron rope on her abdomen, but could not release it. Suddenly, her palm stopped and she carefully stared at the appearance of the iron rope, feeling somewhat familiar. Don't look, it's just the young master's iron rope. The loud voice came from behind, and the visitor was still staring at the bald head. However, his delicate facial features were extremely delicate, and his peach blossom eyes carried a hint of evil energy. He smiled gracefully, raised his hand to retract the iron rope, clasped his palm around Chang Miao's waist, and lowered his head to her earlobe. The warm breath carried a hint of dampness. Chang Miao's face was slightly heavy, only feeling that he had been teased. Wuzhen pinched Chang Miao's slender waist with his palm, and then chuckled, "Why are you so pitiful again? Just emerged from the deep pit not long ago, how did you have the misfortune to encounter this old monster?" Wuzhen looked at Chang Miao, who was covered in dirt, and also felt a little disgusted. How could you be so embarrassed? However, he nodded with satisfaction as he stared at the girl's face. He muttered to himself, "Fortunately, she looks quite handsome." Chang Miao couldn't stand this guy anymore and immediately pushed him away with force. The iron rope around his waist and abdomen was also quickly released. When Chang Miao accidentally fell from mid-air and fell to the ground, he felt like his bones were about to fall apart. The old man looked at the sudden emergence of the hero saves the beauty spirit and spat hard on the ground. He raised his finger and shouted at the floating Wuzhen in mid-air, "It's you again, you stinky kid. Did you mean it? Last time I caught someone, you also ruined it for me. Is there any grudge between me and you?" The old man was furious, and his cultivation was unfathomable. If he could fight, he wouldn't have to point at the other person and curse. "Oh, Pei Lao Guai, is you again, I didn't expect it either. It's just that I'm interested in this little girl. Today, you're probably busy for nothing. As for the people, I'll take them with me. You'll find someone else to go." Wuzhen smiled, but the old man saw disdain in his eyes and couldn't help but roar at Wuzhen in mid-air. But he didn't dare to fight him. This guy is recognized as a madman in the abandoned land, and if he gets angry, his soul will be ignited. You bully people too much. Pei Leiguai could only stomp his feet and shout, but the little girl had already been taken away by Wu Zhen, and he dared not pursue her. It's really heart-wrenching. If he could, he would love to swallow this Wu Zhen into his stomach. However, his strength was not as good as that of a person. He didn't want to try the feeling of being frozen off his entire finger again. The other person was a madman, and the old man couldn't help but think of the appearance of Wu Zhen when he first entered the abandoned land of the gods. At that time, Wu Zhen had not yet shaved off all his hair, and when he fell into the abandoned land of the gods, he was already in a demonic state. He killed every person he saw, and the people who had originally planned for him became his own steps. Like a killing god, such a madman has formed a consensus among the people in the abandoned land of the gods that this evil god is not easy to provoke. At this moment, Chang Miao felt dizzy. She was carried by the bald man flying in mid-air, thinking that this person had saved her twice in a row. She asked for her name. What's your name? Thank you for saving me from that person just now. Chang Miao's voice was a bit weak, and the black aura from the old monster had already consumed her spiritual energy. Originally, the shrine was shattered, and it was not easy for Yu to gather spiritual energy. Now, encountering a black energy almost depleted her spiritual energy. She couldn't help but feel a headache. With such a body, she might need to find some elixirs in the future to fill the old wounds inside. She looked up at the man holding his collar, his lips curling in a smile. Today, he had changed into a plain blue shirt, and he looked down at Chang Miao in surprise. Oh, you only knew you wanted to ask for the name of the young master. I thought you didn't even want to know my name. How could you not even ask for the name of the life-saving benefactor? His words left Chang Miao speechless. While she was waiting for his name, he quickly chuckled and said, "All right, I won't tease you anymore. My name is Wu Zhen. You slender arms and legs, why don't you follow me? At least in this abandoned land, I'm someone no one dares to provoke." Chang Miao was speechless, feeling as if he had fallen into another pit. Not to mention that this person is both righteous and evil, let alone the carefree appearance, which made Chang Miao feel a bit scared. In a moment of hesitation, Wu Zhen had already taken her to a new realm, which was also a good place he had finally discovered in the abandoned land. It was rare to find a bit of rare spiritual energy. When Chang Miao saw this place, he couldn't help but feel a little excited. It wasn't until the soles of her feet touched the ground that she felt a bit real. She thought it would be extremely difficult to have a natural spiritual energy in this abandoned land, as both heaven and earth could nurture spiritual energy. However, only the abandoned land was barren and had no spiritual energy to speak of, and some were just dead spirits. She didn't even think about the path of heaven and humanity, and surprisingly, there was still such a good place. Although this thin spiritual energy may seem insignificant to the outside world, it is like divine assistance to her dilapidated body at this moment. She looked gratefully at Wu Zhen standing next to her and said decisively, "Okay, I'll follow you." 7. Yunling. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing this woman's words, Wu Zhen was somewhat surprised. How could she change her face so quickly? Just now, she still had a displeased expression on her face. Now that she saw this place that was somewhat spiritual, she immediately changed her expression. The woman is really strange. He touched the smooth back of his head and gave a strange glance at the woman in front of him. It was only then that he realized he didn't know her name, and he was extremely embarrassed at first sight. He also called out little girls one by one, feeling strange and uncomfortable. Immediately asked her name, "Little girl, what is your name? I still don't know your name. If you follow me in the future, I need to know your name. You poor little figure will need to practice well in the future." The more he listened, the more helpless he felt. Chang Miao quickly spoke out his name, "My name is Chang Miao." Her voice was a bit hoarse, and Wu Zhen raised his eyebrows and chuckled low. He looked up and touched her messy head. Young master, I know. From now on, you can follow me. This abandoned land is dangerous and treacherous. You, this lifeless guy, don't hold on to my thigh, you will suffer. Looking at the man in front of him with a playful expression in his eyes, Chang Miao didn't want to talk to him anymore. He slapped his palm open, feeling that it was not serious at all. She didn't like to talk too much, and she also devoted herself to cultivation in the witch tribe, rarely talking to outsiders. Chang Miao looked up with a pale face and looked up at the incessant recitation of Wuzhen, feeling like a high monk reciting scriptures, but this high monk still had some false solemnity watching the woman staring at her helplessly, her eyes empty. Wuzhen couldn't help but hold her forehead and shut up. All right, I won't say anything anymore. I'm sure you'll be annoyed if you say too much. You go play on your own. This area is all my territory, and there won't be anyone who doesn't have eyes coming over. Does this mean that you can now freely practice here? Chang Miao walked away happily in an instant, searching for a secluded withered tree and began to concentrate and calm her mind. Her spiritual consciousness infiltrated into her body, and then she carefully explored the veins inside her body. The meridians were broken every inch, and a crack had already opened in her heart. She instantly thought of Yu Qiong, who was nurturing her heart. Sheng Sheng gouged out Yu Qiong from his own heart. That woman is truly vicious. The more she thought about the dull pain in her heart, the more Chang Miao sat cross-legged in place, constantly absorbing the faint spiritual energy around her. But with this in mind, the dull pain in her heart continued to intensify, her breathing deepened, and her eyebrows and eyes furrowed. Ah! The piercing pain of the rune on her forehead was as if 10,000 silver needles were piercing her forehead. The pain was severe, and a layer of cold sweat had already covered her back. She couldn't bear the pain for a moment and fainted directly. The surrounding atmosphere gradually eased, and the rune marks on the forehead gradually faded and disappeared. At this moment, Chang Miao was completely unaware of the changes on his body. The unsupervised man leisurely returned with a wild rabbit, intending to taste the game with his new companion. Unexpectedly, as soon as he returned to the land, he saw the gray figure lying on the ground. Isn't it? I just left for a while, young master. Why did you fall down? Wuzhen didn't expect this guy to be so fragile. She quickly threw down the wild rabbit in her hand and walked over, helping her up. She looked carefully and realized that the circular arc rune between her forehead was missing. He frowned and felt a bit strange. Looking at this girl's appearance, it seemed like she was in a state of impatience and had fainted due to improper cultivation. Ah, young master, just do a good deed. Looking at this guy's pitiful appearance, her pale eyebrows furrowed together at this moment, and her pale face was full of pain. Helpless and helpless, she raised her hand and attached it to her back, transmitting a trace of true energy to wake her up. After a while, Chang Miao, who had been in a coma, felt a warm sensation rushing towards her divine consciousness. She was like grabbing a life-saving straw and quickly absorbing that breath. This was enough to help her transmit the unyielding qi. Oh my goodness, this person also absorbed his excess true qi. After a long time, she finally opened her eyes, confused. She looked at herself pressed against a warm embrace and was completely stunned. Then she quickly stood up and looked at the indifferent and unprofessional smile on her face. She was a little surprised. Did you just pass on that true energy to me? Who else is there besides the young master? Chang Miao, right. How could your body and bones be so weak? This is too fragile, isn't it? The abandoned land is full of danger everywhere, and your body and bones may even be able to make you half dead, even the lowest level spirit beast here. Oh. Wuzhen shook his head helplessly, then stood up quickly and picked up the wild rabbit that he had thrown not far away, and shook it in front of Chang Miao. You really have a good taste today. This wild rabbit is the favorite game of people in the mortal world. I used to like to go to the mortal world to eat this thing when I had nothing to do. Although it was born in a place abandoned by gods, the taste was not very good, but it can satisfy my craving. As Wu Zhen spoke, a blazing fire had already spread from his palm, and the blazing flames began to burn. The originally dim environment suddenly brightened up a bit. Watching the wild rabbits roasted on the fire with a fragrant aroma by Wu Zhen, Chang Miao was very curious. The witch tribe never needed to eat, and if they had to crave that appetite, they would go to the Tian Shan in the Wu mansion to find the spiritual dew to drink. But most of them eat pigu dan. But after all, there's nothing delicious, it's just a bit sweet. Looking at the wild rabbit emitting a delicious aroma, Chang Miao looked at it strangely, his eyes tightly pressed against it. This appearance made Wu Zhen, who was familiar with roasting wild rabbits, laugh. Yu reading www.yuyukangshu.net was still the first person to see the wild rabbit in his hand, staring at him with a tiger's eye. Have you ever eaten it? No, this is the first time I've seen such a strange food. Aren't you really bored these days? Wu Zhen was surprised when she heard Chang Miao say she hadn't eaten this thing before. Then she burst into laughter and looked at the roasted rabbit. She tore off a rabbit leg with her big hand and handed it to her. Eat it. Try it, it's delicious. Keep it safe. You still want to eat it next time. Looking at the rabbit leg that had already been handed to her, Chang Miao had a rare appetite and quickly reached out to take it. She lowered her head and bit it, taking a bite. The plump meat texture gave off a strange taste in her mouth, and she paused slightly. Then, as if she had discovered some new continent, she suddenly took one bite after another, until the corners of her mouth were covered in oil stains and she was extremely happy. Watching Chang Miao, who was eating next to him with a disheveled expression and no regard for his image, Wu Zhen pinched the other rabbit leg he was preparing to start eating, swallowed his saliva, and finally handed his own rabbit leg to her. If you like to eat, then eat more, he said, thank you. Chang Miao smiled and immediately took the rabbit leg with a happy expression on his face. Wu Zhen looked at her eating with curiosity, inexplicably feeling a bit pleasing to the eye. He felt that this girl was different from the girls he had seen before, and his peach blossom eyes reflected Chang Miao's big mouth biting the rabbit leg and wolfing it down, without paying any attention to the man sitting next to him. Delicious. Until she had a full belch, Chang Miao couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. She had never tasted such delicious food before. Today, she tasted it and felt the feeling of fullness for the first time. It was really great. She couldn't help but turn her head to look at Wu Zhen, who was still staring at her, and suddenly felt that she was a bit too rude. 8. Tianji Festival. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It seemed that he saw her embarrassment, and Wu Zhen didn't focus his gaze on her anymore. Suddenly, he thought of something and pointed to Chang Miao's forehead, asking, "You just fainted. When I came back, I saw that the rune on your forehead was missing. What's going on?" Hearing that the rune on his forehead was missing, Chang Miao suddenly looked up and covered his forehead, feeling surprisingly smooth. Fingers quickly condensed into a mysterious mirror, looking at herself inside. She frowned, and the round Wu rune on her forehead was something she had carried since her birth. This rune suddenly disappeared, probably hidden within her skin. It's all right, Chang Miao thought. The rune had been bothering her since she was young, and sometimes when she looked at herself in the mysterious mirror, she felt a bit eerie because of the circular rune sitting between her forehead. Now that it's hidden, she's quite pleased with herself. It's all right. Looking at Wu Zhen, who was still staring at him with a curious expression on his face, Chang Miao sighed helplessly. The mysterious mirror on his fingertips dissipated, and his deep pupils met the peach blossom eyes in front of him. No problem, this roulette rune mark has been present since I was born, probably because the reason for the divine platform in my body has now dissipated. Tisk, scatter. Why doesn't it look like it to me? Forget it, I won't bother you anymore. Recently, you should be more careful. The God-abandoned land is preparing to welcome the heavenly sacrifice. Wu Zhen jumped up and sat on the tree, looking at Chang Miao who was still standing below. Only then did he realize that Chang Miao's shabby appearance was a bit disheveled compared to his entire robe. He couldn't help but glance at the spirit stone in his storage ring and let out a gentle sigh. Chang Miao below was completely unaware. She only heard Wu Jin say that the divine abandoned land was about to receive the heavenly sacrifice. She was curious, but did not expect that there was still this thing in the divine abandoned land. When she was in the witch clan, although she also browsed ancient books to see the origin of the god abandoned land, it was nothing more than a forbidden area opened by the god of the abyss. The god of the abyss was an ancient god, and the people of the Immortal Sect once said that this god-abandoned land was an evil formation opened by the god. Even if it was an evil formation, various opportunities were inevitably present inside. To put it simply, looking back at the entire 50,000 years since the opening of the spiritual land in the Hualan continent, we have never seen anyone from an Immortal Sect go to the abandoned land of gods to seek such opportunities. The abandoned land of gods has always been a mystery for the external immortal sects, and various things inside are unknown to outsiders. Even Chang Miao entered this abandoned land and was able to see this scenery. In Chang Miao's opinion, how could those high and mighty immortal people come into this place? They felt that this place was like a quagmire that would tarnish their noble clothes. The land abandoned by the gods was the realm of abandoned immortals and exiles, which the people of the Immortal Sect did not want to avoid. But now that Chang Miao has come here, she is still reshaping her body. This is her second birth realm, and she feels that she has accepted everything that follows. Surprisingly, there is still a heavenly sacrifice here. We, the Wu tribe, also have sacrifices, but we don't know if there is a difference between the two. Chang Miao searched for a large stone and sat cross-legged leisurely on it, looking at Wu Jin sitting on the tree. Through the scattered leaves, she could see his fair face. It must be said that this bald Buddha looks quite good, at least since she saw these people, he can be considered handsome. At this moment, Wu Jin was holding a leaf in his mouth, feeling bored. He simply leaned back and lay on top of the thick tree roots, looking at the dimly lit sky above. The heavenly sacrifices in this abandoned land of gods are different from those of your witch race. Our heavenly sacrifices in this abandoned land of gods are deadly. Every time the heavenly Tao chooses a person, they must sacrifice their lives and return them to the heavenly destiny. However, it is only those who have committed evil deeds in the abandoned land of the gods that receive the heavenly sacrifice. However, it is better to avoid it. It is inevitable that some madman wants to avoid the heavenly sacrifice and transmit his evil thoughts to another person. Such things are not uncommon. Can evil thoughts still spread to another person? Isn't the person who truly committed evil able to escape this calamity? Isn't the person whose evil thoughts were transferred very innocent? Chang Miao didn't understand this approach. Even if it was the heavenly way, he couldn't take action against these innocent people. But he didn't want her words to fall on Wu Jin's ear. He burst out laughing in an instant, as if hearing something ridiculous. He jumped down from the thick tree root and stood in front of Chang Miao, raising his hand to pinch her chin. "Oh. Innocent person, do you think I'm a good person or a bad person?" The sourness in his chin made Chang Miao uncomfortable. She immediately slapped Wu Jin's palm away and took a few steps back. "I don't like your behavior like this. If you want to ask me whether you are a good or bad person, I can only say that you were a good person when you saved me, and your usual words are still to be observed." Chang Miao originally said that he didn't seem to be a serious person, but after thinking about it, he turned a corner. Bai Jing himself is now walking behind Wu Jin in the abandoned land, so don't make him angry. Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net, TSK, little scammer, your expression seems like I'm forcing you to say that Wu Jin is a good person. Anyway, I've told you that there aren't many good people in this abandoned land. If they are good people, they won't fall into this place. You still need to practice more lest they drag me down at some point. Don't blame me for not saving you when it's time. Wu Jin laughed and then glanced lightly at Chang Miao's petite body, looking up and down. Seeing his gaze somewhat presumptuous, Chang Miao lowered his head to look at himself and quickly stared at Wu Zhen. "What are you staring at me for?" She felt that she was dressed in black and occasionally emitted a foul odor. Probably not many people wanted to get close to her. "I thought Wu Zhen was watching me do something, but I didn't expect him to look at her for a long time and say to her, 'It's time to change into new clothes. You're going to stink like that old ghost Pei.'" He looked a bit comical as he pinched his nose. Chang Miao lowered his head and glanced at himself. That Pei Lao Gui was the ghost cultivator who grabbed him that day, feeding on decaying corpses. How could he smell like him? "I thought this guy was teasing me here," but Chang Miao raised her hand and picked up a corner of her skirt. She found that her dress was indeed in tatters, and she felt a bit helpless. It seemed that her dress was already in a state of disrepair when she was pierced by the 10,000 swords. If it weren't for her not caring about these things for the sake of life, she might have been laughed at for walking out of this outfit. She lowered her eyes and said, "It's time to change." Unfortunately, where did she get to change clothes now? "My black dress was originally sewn for her by a sister of the witch tribe, and I have always been accustomed to wearing it. I also cherish it very much, but now it has worn like this, which is a bit heartbreaking." With a big hand lightly tapping his shoulder, Chang Miao looked up and saw Wu Zhen's smiling face approach her again. "Young master, I still have some spiritual stones, let's go. Let's take you for a walk on Qingshe Street." 9. Tianji, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This translator is experiencing an error. Please try another translator. 10. Heavenly Festival, 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sky was filled with dark clouds, and lightning flashed through the sky one after another. The crowd below was crushed to death by a powerful force and knelt on the ground, surrounded by a strong wind. Chang Miao's clothes were blown flying, and she squinted her eyes, almost unable to open them due to the wind. She glanced at Wu Zhen next to her, who also looked unbearable from the blow. Surrounded by voices of complaints, and even more so, those who want to use their spiritual energy to resist seem to be using eggs to strike stones, which has no effect at all. Wu Zhen glanced at those people who were beyond their control and sneered in a low voice, "You must be crazy. In the land abandoned by the gods, you are delusional about fighting against the heavenly way. Isn't this your own pursuit of death?" In the next second, the few people who had originally used spiritual energy were instantly penetrated by a wave of spiritual energy around their bodies. The tilted spiritual energy instantly scattered their tormented spiritual souls, and the people around them instantly became much more honest. "Oh, I have done many evil deeds in the abandoned land, so I wouldn't be afraid. Isn't it just a small heavenly sacrifice? I'm going to take a break today. See how far you can handle this heavenly Tao, old man." A black-robed old man stood up slowly from among the many people who were bound and kneeling on the ground. Chang Miao saw that his figure was somewhat familiar, but he was quite capable. Under this strong pressure, he could still stand up. "Don't look, this is Mr. Pei, the guy who pulled you away that day. This person is a ghost cultivator who has done many evil deeds in the abandoned land of gods. Unfortunately, he has been following the twisted demon and evil path for many years, and is not afraid of heaven and earth. Today he is afraid of being cleaned up. TSK, the fun in the future will be reduced." Watching Chang Miao staring at Mr. Pei standing tall not far away, Wu Zhen shook his head and said, "He has a deep impression of Mr. Pei. He is a strange old man who likes to eat those disgusting things to cultivate, and I don't know what kind of stimulation he has received, but he has gone through the ghost cultivation path." Upon hearing that it was the person who pulled him away that day, Chang Miao instantly withdrew his gaze. Good guy, no wonder he was so arrogant. Faced with the pressure of the heavenly way, he could still be so domineering. If he hadn't been saved by Wu Zhen that day, he might have been refined and consumed by him. Thinking about it, Chang Miao's face turned pale a few points. The dark clouds in the sky gradually thickened, thunder accompanied by black rain falling, and the surroundings screamed in agony. Chang Miao felt that the new clothes he had just bought were instantly wet, and he really felt a little heartbroken. Even though they were not expensive. The black pupils watched as some people around her were covered in blood, their bodies slowly turning into shadows. Only then did she realize that the heavenly festival had already begun. She couldn't help but turn her gaze to Pei Leiguai, who was initially extremely arrogant and wanted to provoke the heavenly way. However, at this moment, she saw that he was like an ice sculpture, his body was stiff and terrifying, motionless, and his eyes numb. She frowned and couldn't help but ask Wu Zhen, who seemed to be watching a play on the side, what happened. Why is he motionless, and his divine soul hasn't dissipated? He's not among the candidates for the heavenly sacrifice. Just now, Chang Miao clearly saw that as long as someone was selected by the heavenly sacrifice, their divine soul would scatter. Only this Pei Lao Guai, like a statue, remained motionless. Upon hearing Chang Miao's words, Wu Zhen also turned his gaze to Pei Leiguai not far away. He seemed to have seen nothing strange anymore. Every time during this day's festival, Pei Leiguai would come out and scold the heavenly way a few times. Without exception, he would have been transformed into a statue for a while. I don't know why he didn't change it repeatedly. Every time, I don't know if he likes to let the heavenly way torture him or if he is a different kind of provocation to the heavenly way. The heavenly Tao is unwilling to accept things like him that suck on decaying corpses for cultivation. It can only be said that he is not far enough from becoming a heavenly sacrifice person, and the reincarnation Tao does not like people like him who are all dirty. He can only slap his lip. It's not that even the heavenly Tao is unwilling to accept him. The corner of Wu Zhen's mouth twitched, and it was already common to see that Pei Leiguai was motionless. This guy would always take the initiative to do such a thing at this time, which was really frustrating. There were many people around her whose spirits had already dissipated. Chang Miao felt that many people near her had disappeared. After a long time, the dark clouds in the sky dispersed. She looked up and saw that the distant horizon even emitted a faint golden light, some sacred and some void. The black rain in the sky gradually decreased, and her clothes quickly dried through. The constraints on her body disappeared without a trace in an instant. Those who had not been taken away by the heavenly sacrifice stood up and cheered. She looked at everything around her, feeling as if it had just been a big dream, as if she had been redeemed when she woke up today. Let's go, we've finished watching the play too. We haven't finished strolling through Qingshi Street yet. Wu Zhen stood up and patted the dust on his clothes. His face relaxed, as if the previous Shura festival was just a good one, providing him with peace of mind and relief. Are you not afraid that one day you will also be scared out of your wits? Chang Miao said without any hesitation. She believed that being able to make people afraid in the abandoned land and survive for so long would not be a good person. So since the heavenly festival punishes people who do evil in the abandoned land, it is easy for him to turn suddenly. His head hurt. Chang Miao quickly covered his head and looked at Wu Zhen, who had a foul-smelling face. He had slightly raised his peach blossom eyes and pinched her face close to her, saying, "What's wrong? I'm scared to think of you, young master. At least I'm also your life-saving benefactor. This is how you treat your life-saving benefactor. Don't worry, young master, I'm not sitting properly. I can't catch my tail these days, ha ha ha." He smiled exceptionally mischievously, with a face full of indifference. Chang Miao shrugged, indicating that this guy was very capable of avoiding the rules of heaven. It seemed that he had also embraced a thick thigh. She hoped to recover more spiritual energy as soon as possible during this period, and her body could no longer be weak. Hualan continent. In the Hualan Immortal Gate, fragrant mist emanates, and the 4 spiritual pillars continue to climb. A constant stream of spiritual energy flows into the same direction, and that is the Wuzu treasure suspended in the center. Yuqiong. After all the spiritual energy enveloped the Wu clan's spiritual energy in Yuqiong, Jiang Taoyu reluctantly calmed down and walked to the center, forcefully pulling back Yuqiong. The people beside her looked at her like this and couldn't help but ask, "Master, but is Yuqiong still not obedient?" The voice of the gully bird was light and agile. It transformed into a human form and sat beside Jiang Taoyu, looking at her face with its head held up. "Ha! Today I've been more obedient, but the spiritual energy inside is still unwilling to be used by me. This damn witch clan, is this precious treasure only obeyed by the people of the witch clan?" Jiang Taoyu gritted her teeth and looked at Yuqiong in her hand, puzzled. She thought that by taking this Yuqiong, she could use her ability to achieve spiritual energy advancement and at least cross a large spiritual realm. However, no matter what method she used, the spiritual energy inside Yuqiong could never be absorbed.